Hello everybody and welcome to the Romeo and Juliet question and answer. My name is Etta Murphy. I'm the Associate Artistic Director of Matthew Bourne's New Adventures and I'll be hosting this Q&A today. So the next thing we need to do is introduce our panellists, and they are...
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Bourne. I'm the Artistic Director of New Adventures and the Director of Romeo and Juliet.
Hello, I'm Cordelia Braithwaite and I am a principal member with Matthew Bourne's New Adventures.
Hello, I'm Paris Fitzpatrick and I'm also one of the dancers with New Adventures.
Hi there, I'm Dan Wright. I'm one of the performers with New Adventures.
Hi there, I'm Daisy May Kemp. I'm also a performer with New Adventures.
Hello, I'm Ben Brown and I'm also one of the dancers with New Adventures.
Hi, I'm Jackson Fish and I am, funnily enough, also a dancer with the company.
Brilliant! So we've got Matthew and lots of amazing dancers from New Adventures. Before we start the Q&A, it's worth me mentioning that a lot of the questions I'm asking today are from Instagram and Twitter. So thank you very much for everybody who took the time to ask these questions. So let's get going. First question for Matthew. How did you come up with the narrative and story setting for R&J? Did you use any reference material and what were they? And was there a different storyline before you landed on this one? Big
Wow,
question.
that's three questions.
Sorry.
A lot of answering there. I'll try and keep it brief.
Okay.
The idea came about to make the piece in the first place because we'd made a piece called Lord of the Flies a few years back, which involved young people in the production that we worked with around the country. We picked up young men and boys around the country to be in this piece. It was very successful. We loved doing it, and we loved that sort of model of making a piece. So we thought we must follow that up with something. So Etta and I really brainstormed for a while and came up with the idea of Romeo and Juliet, which for me had always been something that had been talked about quite a lot with the company. Why don't you do that? We'd had a success with Cinderella with Prokofiev's score, and I was never that keen because I felt that there were too many versions of it around. It was very overdone in dance and in all other mediums, you know. So I thought, what can we bring to it? But the idea that when we started to talk about it being cast very young and that we would create a show that was about young people and performed by the majority of the cast young people, and that we would pick up young talent along the way with that, it became sort of an exciting idea. So it came through that, really. It wasn't necessarily through a story idea initially, it was through the idea of working with a young cast. And growing out of that, we decided that we would work with the younger members of our current company. We would also bring in a lot of young people from who are recent graduates as professional dancers into the company. And also we would look at dancers who were some way in their dance training, but hadn't graduated yet. So they were, or about to go into training. So in the age range of about 16 to 18, 19, I suppose. We looked at a lot of young dancers around the country in each of the 13 places we went to include those. On top of that, we decided to expand this idea even more and work with young associate creatives. So we work with a young associate choreographer, designer, lighting designer, arranger, conductor, etc. So the whole show was sort of a dialogue between young people, really, feeding an old fogey like me who needs to hear these things from young people and to create something new and fresh, you know. So it's very exciting. The idea of the setting came about because of that idea. We thought if we got into family feuds and we had to cast lots of parents and things like that, half the cast would have been taken up with more seasoned performers, shall we say. So we cut that right down. So people like Daisy, who's here today, she sort of multitasks several roles in the piece, which made us able to cast a much bigger cast of young people. And so that dictated the story somewhat. about young people in an institution of some kind. And that's how they were divided up into boys and girls, men and women in that institution. So it sort of came about through the idea, really. The other question, which is to do with, did the story change? It did quite a bit, because I like to keep my ears and eyes open in rehearsal. And I did write a sort of story to begin with, but I constantly posed questions to everyone along the way. And certainly major things in the story changed during the rehearsal period. That's quite often the case in a rehearsal period, but maybe even more so in this one. So I wanted to hear what people had to say. I was probably a bit annoying for a while, because I wasn't telling people exactly what this place was, the way we were performing in, that we were creating our story in. I think people wanted to know after a while, but I wanted it to be a bit free for everyone to, in the cast, to contribute to that. So it did change.
Yeah, I kind of like the fact that we didn't really know what kind of institution it was, to be honest.
Still not really.
No, because everybody had different ways of dealing with themselves in the institution anyway.
Yeah.
Just leading on, we should talk about Arielle Smith, our young associate choreographer, a little bit. To the cast, what was it like working with Matt, Arielle, our young associate choreographer, me, two resident directors, Alan Vincent and Neil Westmoreland? It's quite massive, isn't it? Who's got some thoughts on that? Who would like to start us off on what that was like, what the rehearsal room was like? Let's go to Paris.
Hello. Yeah, so kind of amazing in the sense that we had so many ideas in the room. You had a range of creatives of all different ages with different ideas, so there was this constant bouncing of ideas back and forth from people, which I think was the best thing. And certainly Arielle is someone that is so full of ideas, just brimming with creativity. So yeah, that was one of the best things for me, working with her. If you ever were stuck on ideas and needed a little bit of inspiration, Arielle's your girl for sure.
What about you, Days?
Yeah, I would say it sort of sounds like a lot of people, but the project in itself was quite immense. We had lots of different, not only did we have two separate casts, we also had the young or the local cast with us as well. So there was a lot of people to sort of hold on to in the room. So creatively, I think it was great that we had all those different inputs, because they had different channels and there was always places you can go, people you could talk to, bounce ideas off. So although it sounds like a lot of creatives, I think it needed it in the room.
Yeah, I felt I did a lot of corralling during the rehearsal period. Dee Dee, did you enjoy working with Arielle?
Yeah, I thought she had an amazing energy that she brought to the room, and I think that was quite pivotal for the young members of the company to see a young, director kind of like give that a big old push, and I think that was quite inspiring for them. And I felt she had a real passion for the project, which certainly carried it for me. So yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to work with her. Someone fresh, someone new. Yeah, I loved it.
Lovely. Dan, what did you think?
She was really easy to work with as well.
Yeah.
Really easy. Like, I mean, I met her for the first time in one of the workshops. And within like 5 minutes, as if you'd known her for ages. Do you know what I mean? It's as if she'd been there for a long time. Obviously, I'd worked with everybody else on numerous things before, and she was the only person really who I'd never worked with before. But like I said, within 5 minutes, it felt like she'd been here a long time. It felt like this wasn't her first project with the company.
Yeah.
It was just so smooth, so easy.
Yeah, it was. Jackson? Probably the same.
Yeah, I mean, much of the same, really. She just has such a fantastic energy about her in the room, and you can't really have a bad day when she's in front of you, because she's just so joyful and just having fun with it, which I think was a really great reminder throughout the whole process, is that we were creating a show, we were doing something really special to everyone, but we were all just having fun and doing this all together as well. And I think she really united everyone in that.
She did. Ben?
Yeah, pretty much just mirroring what everyone else said. She's just got such an infectious personality. But also I found that she was so supportive of people that maybe didn't feel quite as strong with her style of movement. Like, she was really supportive in getting them to a point where they felt comfortable with it and like ready to go with it.
Yeah, I should say as well about Arielle, because I'm just not used to having that other person there in the process, apart from you, Etta, obviously. You know, we talk every day about everything. It took a very special person to come into that environment to work closely with us, and she did become very much a part of the team. It wasn't a token involvement that she had by any means. It was we got along like mates, considering the age gap, which is decades. It was amazing, really. We did really enjoy working together and creating together and coming up with ideas together. And very, I guess we were all very open to each other about the ideas, which is what the project was about, really. But incredible maturity from her, and I really had a lovely time working with her, and I felt we created well together, you know. So I was very thrilled that worked, because it couldn't have done.
Yeah, I agree. She really managed to integrate herself perfectly in terms of the way that we work creatively. She just was very intuitive and knew how to just go, right, I'm going to take over at this point. I've got a really great idea, which was brilliant. She was amazing. And she made everybody feel very comfortable. So it did make the creative process really easy. Yeah, it's true. Hello, Arielle. Just moving on, because we haven't really talked about your characters. If we do the same order that we did before, Dee Dee, Paris, Dan, Daisy, Ben, Jackson, can you just tell us who you play in Romeo and Juliet and what your character is like? So if we start with Dee Dee.
So I play Juliet, and my Juliet, well, I wanted to convey her to be strong, honourable, decisive and protective. And I actually found that she was quite a complex little being as the show kind of developed, and that kind of arose with her relationship with Tybalt. And all the scenes that we have together. And it was, I wanted her to make her a relevant Juliet in this day and age, like a strong female. There's not all of the Juliets out there, but most of the Juliets are quite whimsical, like the ballet. So I wanted her to be a strong female in this piece, especially.
You did that beautifully.
Thank you, Etta.
Paris? Paris, can you hear me? Paris? He's frozen. Let's move on.
Yeah, so...
Oh. Keep going, Paris, if we can hear you. No, let's move on to Dan.
So I play Tybalt, Big Bad Tybalt, the villain of the piece. And he's the head guard, and like Matt said earlier, he didn't want a ton of adult characters. So Tybalt was kind of the big authoritarian character within the piece, and in a sense, it was difficult to have just one person looking after everybody in the whole thing. It was like, well, how can this guy just be in control of all these people? So we decided obviously he was going to be big and he was going to be physical, and he was going to have that physical, scary presence. In fact, they didn't have to do a great deal in order to cast a domineering presence over all the inmates in the place. But at the same time, right from the very beginning, we didn't want him to just be one-dimensional, mean robot. Come on, be bad, be mean, walk off, which would have been really simple to do in a sense, you know what I mean, and easy to do and boring to watch over the piece, because he wouldn't go anywhere. So in creating it, me and Danny and Matt Petty, we did decide that there was going to be layers to this guy, and he was going to have a vulnerability that we would try and explore, and we would show. And also, he was going to still have that physical presence and that domineering nastiness. So you bought into straight away that there's only one guy here, but we can understand why everyone's scared of him and doing what they're told without having tons of other guards and adults milling around. So yeah, really, really interesting, really amazing to do. Really, really great, obviously, to as the piece went on to see it change and to develop it and have the freedom, obviously, to develop it. And yeah, we're really pleased, and I was really proud with obviously what those three guys did in creating it. And yeah, I hope you enjoy obviously what we did. But it was amazing character to do, amazing character to play.
Yeah, and you were definitely
really pleased.
You definitely gave the whole feeling of that institution a weight and a gravitas. Whenever you're in the space, you really notice what you're doing and what you're looking at, and you really focus the story really well, I think.
Should we explain that to the for those that don't know, that we have 2 or 3 casts creating roles sometimes, but what Dan was saying, so they understand.
Yeah, so whenever we work, we always have at least 3 people creating or working on each role. So the cast that we're talking to at the moment is our Capulet cast, but we did have 2 casts. There's the Capulets and the Montagues. And so each character always has several people who play the same part. So they create those parts together, which is often really positive, because it means that you can sit back, you can watch that person do the same part as you, and then you can bounce ideas off each other, which is really amazing. And in creation, it really helps, I think. We can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, it really helped in the creation of this piece, I think.
Yeah, no, it really did.
Watching a complete other cast, so you start to really think about what you're doing, what you can do, take things from people.
Yeah, totally. Daisy, can you talk about
yeah, as Matt mentioned, I play a sort of trio of characters. The first being the nurse, which is very different to sort of the traditional nurse you might see. She's part of the authority figure with sort of under Tybalt of the regime. So very strict, sort of follows orders, very stripped back character. Then we've got Mrs. Montague, who is paired up with the Mr. Montague, who's Senator Montague, they're a power couple. So she, very much there's a lot of striding in the power suit, but very cold mother and father figure to Romeo, as they drop him off at the institute and sort of wash their hands of him, because he's not sort of grown up to be the model child that they wish. And then the third character is Reverend Bernadette Lawrence, who she is the sort of happy clappy warm hug of the story, and a bit of the comic relief as well. But she is very much a side of the institute that tries to inject some warmth into it, because it's a very sterile environment. She would be the one that the inmates might go to if they had any problems, or they could confide in her. She was always sort of on the side of the inmates. We did talk a lot actually with Dan and Rubes, who played Tybalt, about a relationship that actually maybe Bernadette Lawrence and Tybalt have quite a deeper connection, that maybe he has broken down to Bernadette in the past, and there was a lovely kind of underlying story between them two. But yeah, she's sort of the warm hug of the show.
Yeah, she's one of my favourite characters.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Let's move on to Ben.
So I played Mercutio, and me and Reese had a lot of discussions about why he was in the Institute, and we kind of decided on the idea that he came from, like, back home, his stepfather was abusive to himself and his mother, and we thought that would tie in really well for his reasoning to hate Tybalt, because of the fact that it kind of reminded him of where he came from. So within the show, there's lots of times where he's kind of trying to either stop Tybalt from abusing Juliet or anybody else in the Institute. But yeah, so we decided that we wanted him to be quite a strong, like, fierce character. And also it's worth to mention that he is in a relationship with Balthazar, which was quite an interesting dynamic to get to play, especially in the setting of the Institute of Love is Forbidden. So yeah, me and Jackson had a lot of fun working on that and how it's going to weave into the show.
Yeah, he's a pleasure pleaser as well. He likes people to have fun as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, ever the showman.
Ever the showman, very true. All right, thank you, Ben. Moving on to Jackson.
I played Balthazar in the piece, and I think the early conversations of Balthazar kind of came true throughout the process. We wanted him to be very political and passionate about queer rights, particularly, which was something that was very much so repressed within the Verona Institute. So his qualities kind of stemmed from that idea because of his passion for this subject and the situation he was in and the repression of being able to express that and feel that freedom that he was fighting for. That is kind of how, yeah, he began to take shape as this, yeah, aggressive, quite emotional character.
Yeah, which does come through. Paris, you're back.
Hello, yes, I'm back. Sorry about that. I think my
That's all right.
internet's a bit shoddy.
Yeah.
Yes, so I played Romeo. Romeo was a young man who, as Daisy mentioned, was the son of two sort of politician type people who never really had much time for him. So he never really experienced very much in the way of love in any form, I guess. We think he was probably nannied for most of his life. And yeah, as Daisy mentioned, sort of shoved in this institute because he turned out to be not what they wanted. They didn't have time for him. He was just, yeah, a bit of a burden. So he's someone who doesn't really know how to express himself, which is something that develops as the show goes on. But yeah, because of his upbringing, he's quite odd. I think certainly a bit quirky, a bit odd, but sweet. I think just quite innocent, I guess, naive, and eager to feel and eager to experience.
Lovely. Moving on a little bit. This is one of the questions from Twitter, and this is for you, Matt, really, which is, did you struggle to update the ballet to modern times while still using the Prokofiev score? And I suppose we should ask this question as well, which is, could you talk about the score and how you worked with Terry Davis to make the score more relevant to the piece?
Right, okay. Well, in a way, the score isn't really the problem. The score is brilliant and motivating and dramatic and beautiful and violent and all the things you kind of want it to be. It's just a case of choosing all the right bits and making it work for the story that you're telling. But I think the thing that was very clear in everyone talking about their characters is that they don't really relate that much to Shakespeare. They're not the characters from the Shakespeare play. They've got the names of them, most of them, of the characters, but they're sort of they're a creation in their own right. And that's what you know, I wanted to do and what I encouraged everyone to do with their characters, but also with the story. I think what I said earlier about maybe feeling it was overdone was very much something that was very freeing in terms of storytelling, because I felt I didn't care if we went off the plot.
Yeah.
As long as it felt like right in some way. It was a Romeo and Juliet type story, and it still had everything you want from Romeo and Juliet in it, which it still does. You know, it's got the conflict, it's got the love, it's got the tragedy, all those things that are in it. But I felt very free, and I felt very free for us all to create. And some of the guys, like I remember Dan and Rube's coming to me and saying, we want our character to be a bit more rounded, like Dan was saying. We want him to have an emotional moment in the show, a breakdown of some kind. So he's a layered character. And I do remember saying to everyone, you know, people aren't just one thing. They're many things. You know, try and think of your character as a layered character. Of course, the Juliets, as Dee Dee said, wanted to not be put upon, everything done to them. They wanted to be a stronger character, which is completely right for now. And after all, we are setting it in the modern day, if not a bit into the future, was the idea. So all those things helped the story develop in the way that it did, in its own way. It becomes its own story. So part of my job in the rehearsal period is to really try and keep that story going and nail it and find a way of it working with the music. And that's the way where Terry Davis came in as an arranger, an orchestrator. Well, arranging, actually, I would say it more is than orchestrating. It's not a reduction of the score. It's a completely new arrangement that people will hear in this film. And it's played live for the film as well. It is many less musicians than you would normally have for Romeo and Juliet. If you go to the Opera House, the Royal Opera House, to see it, you'll see 70 or 80 people in the pit playing the score. We had, like, what was it, 17, something like that, 19, something like that. Under 20 anyway, playing it. It sounds amazing. It's so powerful still. Terry did an incredible job of making it work with that amount of musicians. And I think the performers, I'm sure they'll agree, it found it a very sort of visceral sort of experience working with that exciting music. I mean, it's many people's favourite ballet score probably. But I'm so proud of the fact that we have our own version of it, and that we did a take on it that's completely ours, and that nobody else has, you know, and that we did something different with it, you know, Romeo and Juliet, and, to be honest, the Prokofiev score, which is heard a lot. It needed that kick up the bum a bit, really, I think. So I think we did. Yeah, I'm happy about that.
It really did. I mean, I think the score is amazing. Dee Dee in Paris, you know, when you're in rehearsals and you're, you know, working on a duet or solos, this is another question from Twitter, does the music really play a part in those scenes? Does that really help you with the storytelling? Should we go to Dee Dee first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ever since working with New Adventures, I can just always, Matt has said that the music really communicates to you. It speaks to you. So it's so important. And especially with this score as well. I struggled a little bit sometimes because it's very hard to count in some scenes. But yeah, the music really carries what you kind of, how you want to, I don't know, it leads it. It does lead a lot. So I do find that. So it's vital.
Yeah, I feel you're quite driven by the music, aren't you?
Yeah.
All the time. Paris.
Yeah, I think, Dee Dee's completely right. I think, as is the case with any of Matt's work, the music is arguably kind of one of the most important aspects because it dictates the movement entirely. I feel like Matt, when he listens to music, it paints a picture in his mind of how he sees the movement to be. And that's the case in every sense of a scene. So in the dancing scenes, the duets and stuff, you know, obvious, but also in the acting scenes where there's less dancing going on, every single gesture will be on a beat or a count or something in the music. The music will say something and the movement or the gesture will reflect it. So they kind of marry each other and it creates a real nice like finished product, kind of the icing on the cake, I think, which I think probably a lot of audience members may not register that all of those scenes are completely musical, but yeah, it just really finishes.
Yeah, they are. And also your relationship, the way you work together, Didi and Paris, and Sarah and Andy, and our other Romeos and Juliets, the way you all worked together musically and really worked. And
you have to be able to,
each movement was going to connect to the music was really amazing, really beautiful to watch.
You have to be able to feel the music in the same way, which is not always easy, but I think certainly I found with Didi we were on the same page with that.
I think something Paris said that's interesting about scenes, because sometimes in a lot of our shows, actually, but in this as well, there's sometimes you're acting a scene which is sort of told through mime or acting, facial expression, body language, simple movements around furniture or stuff like that, which is why and people say, well, anyone can do that. You don't have to be a dancer to do that. But I think it's that musical thing that dancers have, and that counting thing, and that knowledge of how to make music work, which is makes it completely only valid when it's done by dancers. It's only possible to be done by dancers, because actors would find that terribly restricting. If they're purely acting, you know, that you have to hit this thing, you have to hit that thing. That's why all you guys are so brilliant at that. But it's a dancer's mind which makes you able to do that and relate your acting to music completely, precisely.
It gives you a freedom once you've got that framework and you know that you've got to hit certain points and certain counts. Suddenly it opens it up even more, because you know what you need to do, and you can really explore all of those bits between all the counts as well, which I always find really interesting. Anyway, we should move on. Daisy, could you talk to us a little bit about the rehearsal process, what it's like in rehearsals? We touched on us working with two casts, but maybe just tell us a little bit about the rehearsal process.
Yeah, so sort of there's many different bits of the rehearsal process. Sort of starting backwards, we had the company, we had about 6 weeks together in the rehearsal room, and we had the local cast that we were working with first with us. I think it was every Saturday. A normal day, we start with class. We have either contemporary or ballet class, and then we get straight into it. Day one, straight into it. Matt and the creative team might have a little plot of what they want to achieve by the end of the week or the end of the day, but it's all hands on deck. We usually have another space, 2 spaces, where the majority of the company might have been set a task in one room, and then Matt might have a smaller group, maybe doing more scene work in another studio, and we kind of throw things on the table and go, right, how can we do this? Let's talk together. Let's put out offerings. Offerings are always good, you know, because it's a collaborative experience, and we're all kind of coming together to do it. So that's sort of 6 weeks together. But before that, the principals would have had workshop days together, sometimes a week or 2 weeks, and then, because of the way that this project worked, we then had the local casts who had 4 intensive weekends over a year. So this is like huge in terms of preparation, coming up with material. The local cast had to be auditioned before we knew what the show really was. So it was kind of, you had to go back to come forwards in this. So that's kind of working backwards. That's how the process worked for this unique production.
Yeah, and I suppose what was different as well, every time we went to, once the show had been put on stage and we started touring, we were in a situation where we had 6 new young people coming to join the cast each week, and everybody had a job. It was, as Daisy said, hands-on. Every little bit of the show, there was somebody who had a job to do with one of those young people, which was amazing. So it really was a hands-on kind of affair. In the rehearsal period, Matt, as you said earlier, you have one idea and then somebody gives you an offer, as Daisy said, and then that can shift and change things quite a lot.
Yeah.
Do you, what's it like towards the very end when you're trying to pull all of the different strands of the show together? Does your brain sort of go, or can you keep yourself really focused on what you're trying to do?
It's the exciting thing, really, when things do come together, because I think when you either got a good idea yourself or someone says an idea and you go, that's a brilliant idea. And I personally don't have, I know we all have to have our pads and write things down during rehearsals, but I don't ever forget a good idea. It just, once it's in there and I know it's a good idea, I don't need to write it down because I'll never forget it. But as you said earlier, it's great having yourself and Arielle to get on with things sometimes when I'm trying to work out a plot thing. Because my job, in a way, in creating a new show, much more is to do with the overriding arc of the story and the character, feeding information out to everyone to make sure they're going in the right direction with their creating of those characters and pulling back from some things and pushing other things, discussing with them, whether they feel that's a good journey for their character. We did that quite a lot, I think. And then hearing what they've got to say, and that can really, I can get really influenced by people's views on what they're doing as well. My real pleasure in doing these shows is working with people and hearing what they have to say. I'm not ever a dictator as such. But I do have to have the final sort of say, as you say, and I have to sort of make decisions sometimes about where we're going and how that relates to the music. I think I'm the one who's most in control of music and knowing how that's going to work to tell our story and what we've got left to do and how that can slot in there and that phrase might be good for that bit and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on. When I appear to be doing nothing, there's a hell of a lot going on. That's why Arielle and everyone is brilliant, sort of like just do something, while we work.
Yeah, that is true. And also when you see something that's an offer, that can often lead to different things, can't it?
Completely, it can change your whole way of thinking.
Yeah,
as with any of your collaborators actually working on a show, it can go off in a completely new direction because someone's suggested this bit of music or this style, or
Yeah, and I suppose that's true of Les as well, because Les is one of your main collaborators, and he can give you a world in which to work, which then probably takes you off on a completely different tangent as well.
It does completely. I mean, a good example is the great big sort of spaceship that comes down like our ceiling.
Who knew?
A mirror ball comes through. I mean, I didn't ask for that. But then it becomes this great moment for Daisy's character where she has a sort of religious experience revealing a mirror ball. But I didn't say, could we please have that, to have this moment. We related to the set and came up with something, that's the way it works.
Yeah, it's always amazing to see how you and Les work together, actually, because you'll give him an idea and he'll probably give you something that's completely different but is in parallel with the idea that you've given him, and it will again take you off on a different tangent. So it's quite interesting, that collaboration. Yeah. Just carrying on a little bit longer about the rehearsals. Jackson, during rehearsal period, Matt is always brilliant at giving people reference material to work with. Could you talk a little bit about what that's like, especially when you're for the first time forming a character?
Yeah. It was really interesting with Balthazar because he's not a major part of the traditional story. So to find references to create this character was really important. And it came about more so with how we wanted him to respond to certain situations. So obviously he was a queer character in this place where that is not celebrated. So to counteract that, it was a lot about researching queer history and kind of getting a little bit angry about that. So as a character, he knew how to respond, if that makes sense. It was kind of like a backward route to find how this person that doesn't really exist might respond to the situation they're put in. So a lot of the research that I did was about queer history, which kind of informed how this person would feel about being in this situation.
Yeah, that's good. And for some of the others of you, did your research help you find your character or not? Ben, what do you think?
I think for myself, the research helps kind of form a character, but I always find that as like either the rehearsal process or the show goes on, you kind of find out more about the character. So like when I'm like researching what the character is, it's kind of just for their personality traits and how they might react off certain situations, like Jackson was just saying. But then it's kind of more about how they interact with different characters within the show, which kind of forms who that character is for me.
Yeah, I think you learn more, don't you, the more you do it, which leads us on to one of the other questions, which is, did your character change during the rehearsal process and during the length of the tour? Dan?
So when we start to develop a character, we get a lot of references from films. So Matt gives us a long list of films to watch. So it's very visual. So I always find that kind of stuff helps me the most in the terms of picking out things from specific films, from people's physicality and what they're doing character-wise. And then obviously latching onto things that you think are going to be beneficial for your character. Then obviously as the piece goes on, like Ben says, you start to react with other people and you start to find out what works for your character, what feels most comfortable to you in what you're doing and how you're portraying what kind of emotion or what kind of physicality you want to portray in that character. And then you've got the other sense of obviously all your backstory. What are you actually going to show to the audience? What are they going to get from this? Because you can have a lot of stuff going on, but when you've got 30 people with a lot of stuff going on, what are we actually telling in any specific given time in the piece? You know what I mean? So then, for me, as it changes, it becomes simpler. So you start to decide what actually works, what feels most comfortable for you in portraying a certain thing, and how crisp and clear you can get it to the audience in the most simple way. So and that for me that develops as the whole show goes on. So it slowly becomes pared down and down and down and down. So it becomes a path of least resistance in a sense. What can you do with minimal? What the biggest impact you can get with the minimal amount of movement and effort and anything like that. And for me, it becomes true to obviously what I'm trying to do as a character, and I think also for an audience member, it becomes very clear and very simple in what you're saying. So you're not jumbling it up too much. You're not giving people too much, and it becomes too confusing. And again, that pairs down to the music. And like Paris said before, you don't necessarily know how much an audience member is realizing that all these acting scenes are very particular and very musical until you see them off the music. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until you see them kind of scenes where they're not, as you're putting them together, if they don't quite work with the music, it's very apparent how unclear it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when it does perfectly pair down together, it becomes very crisp, very readable, and very new adventures. You know what I mean? You get that sense of, there's no words, but we got a phenomenal story just through movement. How did we do that? Well, it's because it is so particular without actually realizing it.
I'm gonna move on a little bit because we're running out of time because we've got so much to say. This will be for Dee Dee first. How does it feel? This is another question from Twitter. How does it feel to be in a show like this? Does it take its toll emotionally and physically? And how do you decompress after the show? It is massive, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think like when you're in it, I said like when this was finished and I had like a week of just processing it all, I don't really think I kind of realized like the sheer amount of success that we were going to get with it. I think I went into it, I was nervous. Truth be told, I was very nervous because, you know, you're having this show which is so well known and done so many times that I was scared that I was going to fail. And I think a lot of people might feel that as well. Like it's a big it's not pressure, but it is at the same time. Like you just want to be good at it. You want to make sure it's real and it's going to be successful. And I don't think I realized that it, you know, over at Sadler's and the gala and the film, and you don't realize what you're in until it's finished and you're processing it. But physically and emotionally, yeah, it was a lot. I realized it was, yeah, I think I put my all into it as everyone else did. And yeah, it was a good old defrag time after, but it's a hard story. It is a hard story, and you're killing your best friend and yourself every day. So it's like, you know.
Yeah. Paris, how did you try and deal with it? Because it is massive.
Yeah,
emotionally.
It is. I mean, firstly, an amazing opportunity to play a role where you have so much room to give so much and really delve deep into a character and go on this crazy journey of emotions and first love and dying sometimes like 6 times a week. It's intense, so fun and so rewarding, but really intense. And I think I realized quite quickly the first few weeks of shows, because I was so heavily engulfed in the show. It was kind of all I could think about, just because as Dee said, like you know, it's no small feat. You want to do it justice. You want to do well. You want to give audiences something to feel and something that's worthwhile watching. So yeah, it was a lot. It was kind of all I could think about. Even at night, I was in bed, like going, you know, in my dreams, going through steps and like trying to, I don't know, just yeah, not really switching off. But I think I realized after a few weeks of exhaustion that it's something that, you know, once the curtain's down, once the show's finished, it's off, and you know, you come back the next day and you start afresh. You don't need to carry it with you, because it can be a bit like that sometimes.
Jackson, what about you? And I'll come back to you, Didi, in a sec.
In many ways, it obviously was such an emotional show to perform that often. But when you felt like you went there and you really kind of lived it in that moment, once you're off stage, you kind of have a moment of, oh, that was kind of cool. Like I really actually quite enjoyed that, even though the topic and the subject is quite intense and sad most of the time throughout this show. When you've done it and you feel good about it, that was my unwind. That was like, yeah, that happened in a sense in reality, and I felt the way I did feel about it. But when you can reflect on it afterwards, it's a really great feeling. And I kind of just rode that and tried not to think about the music when I was in bed at night.
Yeah, that's hard.
Kind of what that is. What yeah, the first few weeks it was the drumming at the end of Act 2 that I would fall asleep to.
Oh, God. Awful.
And then guys, they were all covered in cuts and bruises throughout this process.
Yeah.
Remember, I've never seen so many. Oh, still got them. Yeah,
true. It was painful. Dee Dee, you had a point?
Yeah, I think it certainly is this specific kind of topic, the kind of processing it after, I found myself doing more so than ever in a production. And I think it was for the young cast to also almost kind of teach them as well, because it was some of the scenes were quite heavy for them, that I learned that I probably needed to help them kind of process what had just happened as much as I did. So that was something that I took away from it. It was quite a rewarding feeling, kind of, just checking in with them and seeing if everything's okay, and like it is on stage, and how you can handle doing something like that on stage, and then how you can be after it and just kind of not take it home with you. So it was I
suppose, Dan, you've had a bit of experience of that with Lord of the Flies, working with all those young men, and then there's more or less the same thing, isn't it? Same process we went through with the young people in Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah,
you have to become a pal, don't you, to those young people?
You become a like, you're supposed to be through mentors and all that kind of stuff, but in a sense they're bringing just as much mentorship to you in a way.
Yeah.
Because obviously if you've done a few things before, you're more of a seasoned performer, you can get, what works for you, you get comfortable, you kind of get, don't get stuck in your ways, but you tend to lean towards your strengths and all that kind of stuff, and then suddenly an influx of new people, new ideas shocks you out of that in a way, and you think, oh yeah, brilliant, I didn't even think about that. Especially with Lord of the Flies, when we had all them new young lads coming in, some of them never even had a dance experience, so they were coming in completely raw, the ideas were completely off the wall, fresh, and it was amazing for us guys to be part of.
We're going to have to wrap this up, because we've talked for ages and I think it's been amazing. But just to finish off, Matt, one of our questions is, will you remake this production again?
I don't quite know what that means. You remake, or will we do it again?
Will we do it again, I suppose?
We'll definitely do it again, of course.
We'll definitely do it again.
Yeah,
yes!
Do it enough. But as Dee Dee was saying, by the end of it, everyone was it shattered, really, and from the emotional experience of creating it and then performing it. And it was an amazing experience, I feel, for everyone. And these guys that we're talking to today are all amazing in this film version. We should sort of plug the film a little bit, because it's
we will. Yes, I'm going to do that.
Oh, you're going to do. You'll get very good. Thank you. But I just wondered, what everyone felt about seeing themselves in the film, because we've all seen it, of course, and I wonder how that experience was. It's my question to everyone, really.
That's a good question. Yeah. Let's start with Dee Dee.
It was I really was nervous seeing it. I didn't know, some things that you think might have felt good maybe not looked so good, and that's always quite a worry. And I think it's quite hard, like looking at yourself, but I think it's also a good thing, because you really can see the thing as a whole, and how you can learn from what you see. Like, you learn from everyone, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to seeing it again, because I don't think I properly processed it the first time, but then I think I kind of look at it with more of a critical eye this time round, and just see where, maybe mistakes or things that didn't come across, I could potentially make it come across again. But yeah.
Daisy?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because New Adventures usually do hundreds of shows of a production, and it's very funny having one sort of stuck in time. Because that's part of the company, is that every night you can have an opportunity to try something new, but yeah, having one suspended in time is a funny thing to watch, because we carried on doing the show for a few more weeks after it was filmed, and inevitably you find different things and you go, oh damn, I wish I'd found that when it was filmed. which I think as a creative, you'll always think that. But there's always new things to find. But I think as a production on the whole, it's a beautifully captured on film.
Ben?
Yeah, I found it really weird it being only like the second time I'd actually seen the show. Because normally we get lots of opportunities to actually watch the show because of the way that the casting worked out. Like, I think Dan said that the first time that he saw the show was the Capulets' last show. So actually watching the show for the second time and it being the screening was quite a peculiar situation. But yeah, also the same as what Daisy was saying, there's things that I'd found towards the end of the run that I wish I could have got into the filming. So there was a bit of like, oh, I wish that had come around earlier. But yeah, peculiar, but loved it.
Jackson?
It's always a performer's potential worst nightmare to see themselves blasted in front of them on a massive screen. But I think that's what I realized when I watched it. And so doing the work to not feel like that next time is what I kind of took away from it. Just to kind of like, we did this, it was brilliant, it is brilliant, it's an incredible film. And to just love it for what it is, learn from it, obviously, but really just like celebrate this thing that we made.
Yeah,
that's what it's for. It's for more people to enjoy. And that's what we get to do that now.
Yeah.
Dan, let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah. It's terrible. Got a strong signal, obviously.
Let's move on to Paris.
Hello. Thank you, Dan. That was great. Yeah, so I think firstly, an amazing thing to do, an amazing thing to do, because it makes it so much more accessible for people who maybe can't afford to go to the theatre or don't have access to the theatre or whatever. As the guys said, it's strange. It's very difficult at first. Certainly, like while you're performing the show, I think what's nice is that now the show has been put to rest. We can just watch it objectively and just kind of enjoy it and not sit there going, oh, I wish I did that better. Oh, and you know, wish I didn't look like that there. But yeah, I think it's great. And I think also a nice thing is that you get lots of close-ups. You get to really see facial expressions. Sometimes, yeah, they might be quite intense because we were actually performing to an entire sold-out Sadler's Wells auditorium. But also you don't have to decide where to look. The cameras choose the way it's the film's been directed is that you won't miss any key bit, because sometimes there's a lot going on stage. You don't know quite what to look for. You might miss little key opportunities, lovely little moments with people at the side, and all these great moments that are easily missed. You won't miss. So yeah, I think it's great.
Thank you so much for taking part in our Romeo and Juliet Q&A. If you're interested in watching the show will be on tonight at 8 p.m. on Sky Arts, and then on Catch Up, and then from tomorrow, which is Monday, on Now TV. And if you're also interested in anything else that New Adventures does, you can go to our website and particularly look for Real Adventures, which is REEL Adventures. And that tells you what we're doing online weekly and day by day. And that's very informative and gives you an idea of what we're doing. Anyway, thank you ever so much for listening, and please do enjoy Romeo and Juliet tonight on Sky Arts. Thank you. Bye-bye.